I found it on a Tuesday. Not a special Tuesday. Not the kind that marks itself on your calendar with a red circle or a note that says, "Remember this." It was the kind of Tuesday that exists just to get through. Gray sky, cold coffee, a board meeting I'd been dreading for 2 weeks. I was alone in the car. Bella had dropped me off at the office and gone to park. I'd forgotten my phone on the seat, realized it halfway to the elevator, turned back. She'd left the car unlocked. She always did. Because she knew I'd do exactly this. Forget something. Retrace my steps. Pretend I hadn't. I reached for my phone. And then I saw it. A folded piece of paper tucked into the side pocket of the door. Not hers. I could tell immediately. The paper was mine. My stationery. The kind I keep on my desk at home. Cream-colored with a faint watermark. The kind I haven't used in years because everything is email now and paper feels like a confession. I didn't remember writing anything. I picked it up anyway. It was a drawing. Rough, quick, the kind you do when your hands are moving before your mind gives permission. 2 figures. One behind a steering wheel. One in the back seat, looking at the one driving. No faces. Just lines. Just the shape of 2 people in a car, existing in the same space at the same time. I had drawn it. I knew because of the pen. It was my pen. The black one with the gold clip that I carry in my coat pocket. The one that runs out of ink every 3 months and I keep replacing because I can't find one that feels the same in my hand. I must have dropped it without thinking. Left it in the car. Left the drawing in the car. Left something of myself in a space that didn't belong to me. I stood there in the cold parking garage, holding that piece of paper, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Caught. Not by Bella. She hadn't seen it, I was almost certain. Caught by myself. By the proof that my hands had been paying attention to something my mind had spent months refusing to name. I folded the paper, put it in my coat pocket, walked back into the building. But I kept my hand over that pocket for the rest of the day, like I was keeping something alive. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Let me start from the beginning, because the beginning matters, even if it didn't feel like one at the time. My name is Joan. I am 41 years old, and I have spent the better part of 2 decades building something that most people would look at and call a success. I run a company, a real one, not the kind that exists on paper to impress strangers at dinner parties. We develop infrastructure software for financial institutions. It is not glamorous. It is not the kind of thing that gets you invited to magazine covers or keynote stages. But it is solid. It is mine, and for most of my adult life, it has been enough. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it with the particular honesty that only becomes possible after everything changes. For a long time, it was enough. I live in Manhattan. I have a 2-bedroom apartment that I moved into 7 years ago when I could finally afford to stop pretending I didn't care about the view. The 2nd bedroom is an office. I am not the kind of person who has guests. I am not the kind of person who plans for company. My assistant, Renata, organized my car service 2 years ago. I'd been taking cabs, which was inefficient, and she'd finally had enough of rescheduling meetings because I'd gotten stuck in traffic with a driver who didn't know the alternate routes. She presented me with 3 options on a Monday morning. I picked the one with the best reviews and didn't think about it again. That's how Bella came into my life. Not with drama, not with any particular announcement. She was simply there on a Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m., standing beside a black car outside my building, holding a small cardboard sleeve with my name written on it in handwriting that was neat without being careful. The kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who has better things to think about than the aesthetics of their lettering. I got in the car. She said, "Good morning, Ms. Joan." "Heading to the office first?" I said, "Yes." That was our entire first conversation. I opened my laptop. She drove. The city moved past the windows the way it always does, fast and indifferent, and completely unbothered by the fact that two strangers were occupying the same 12 feet of space. She knew the routes. That was the first thing I noticed, not about her, but about the situation. She didn't use the GPS for the morning routes. By the second week, she already knew where I was going before I told her. She anticipated. She didn't ask. She just adjusted. I told myself that was efficiency. That's what I hired for. I told myself I wasn't paying attention to her, that I was working, that the back seat of a car is not a place where things begin. It is a place where you prepare for the things that are about to happen somewhere more important. I believed that for longer than I should have. Bella was 34. I didn't know that at first. I learned it the way I learned most things about her, slowly, in pieces, without meaning to ask. She'd been driving professionally for 6 years. Before that, she'd been in physical therapy, studying, then working, then stepping back from it for reasons she mentioned once and didn't elaborate on. I didn't push. I don't push. Pushing requires the admission that you want to know something, and wanting to know things about people is a vulnerability I learned early to keep to myself. She was from Ohio. She laughed quietly, like she wasn't sure she had permission to take up space with the sound. She always had coffee, real coffee, from a place she'd identified as the best in a 3-block radius, waiting in the cup holder for me by 6:45. I never asked her to. She started doing it sometime in the 3rd week, and by the 4th week, I would have noticed its absence the way you notice silence after a sound you've gotten used to. I noticed these things. I told myself it was because I was observant, that it's useful to observe the people who work for you. That attention is not the same as interest. That was my first lie to myself. The second was that it didn't matter. She drove me to the airport, to dinners, to conferences in the suburbs, to my quarterly visits to my mother's apartment in the Upper West Side, those last ones always quiet on the way there and quieter on the way back. She drove me home late on nights when the board meetings ran long. She drove me through a February blizzard without complaining once, navigating streets that the city had essentially given up on, humming something low under her breath that I couldn't identify but found, without understanding why, deeply calming. I told myself I didn't notice the hum. I noticed the hum. There was a version of me in those early months who had a very clean story about what our arrangement was. She provided a service. I compensated her for it. The relationship had clear edges. I liked clear edges. My entire life had been built inside them. But edges, I was about to learn, are only clear until something starts pressing against them from the inside. And something had already started pressing. I just hadn't looked at it yet. It happened in pieces, not all at once. That's the thing no one tells you about realizing something that disrupts everything. It doesn't arrive like weather. It seeps. It comes in through the cracks you thought were sealed. The first crack opened in March. I had a 7 a.m. flight to Boston. A 1-day trip. Presentations in the morning, meetings through the afternoon, back by evening. The kind of trip I'd done dozens of times, smooth and functional, and completely devoid of anything worth remembering. Bella picked me up at 5:15. The city was barely awake. The sky was that particular dark blue that exists in the hour before dawn, when the night hasn't decided to leave yet. I got in the car. She didn't say anything right away, which was normal. I pulled out my tablet, but then she said, "How long has it been since you slept more than 5 hours?" I looked up. She was watching me in the rearview mirror. Not intrusively. She had that particular quality of attention that manages to be direct without feeling like an invasion. Her eyes moved back to the road almost immediately. I said, "That's not relevant to getting me to the airport." She said, "No, it's not." And then nothing. The city moved. The lights blurred past. But here is what I remember. I didn't answer dismissively, the way I would have answered that question from Renata, or from my assistant's assistant. or from any of the dozen people who occasionally venture into the territory of my well-being, as if it were professional courtesy. I didn't say mind your own business with the particular tone that ends conversations. I didn't say anything at all. I looked out the window, and I thought 5 hours would have been generous. It was the first time I'd let someone see that without correcting the impression immediately. The second crack opened 6 weeks later. I had a meeting that fell apart in a way that doesn't fall apart quietly. A partnership I'd been building for 18 months. A woman I'd trusted with significant information and who had decided ultimately that my competitor's offer was more attractive. I won't name her. I won't describe what she did in detail. What matters is that by the time I got back into the car at 4 p.m. on a Wednesday, I was running entirely on rage and the particular cold clarity that comes when you decide you will not let anyone see you break. Bella took one look at me in the mirror. She didn't ask. She drove for 10 minutes in silence, and then she said, "Do you want to go somewhere else before the office?" I said, "What?" She said, "You don't have to go back yet. I can drive." I stared at her. "I have a 3 o'clock, I said. "It's 4:15, she said. I had forgotten. I had entirely forgotten. My 3 o'clock had apparently passed without me. "Where would we go?" I asked. It came out strange, softer than I intended. "Doesn't have to be anywhere specific," she said. "Sometimes just moving helps." I should have said no. I should have told her to take me to the office. I should have opened my phone and reconstructed the meeting I'd missed and begun the process of damage control that the situation clearly required. I said, "Okay." She drove us over the bridge and along the water. 30 minutes. No conversation. The radio was off. The late afternoon light was doing something complicated with the river, turning pieces of it silver and pieces of it dark, and I watched it the way you watch something when you're not ready to look at anything else. By the time we turned back toward Midtown, the rage had subsided into something that felt more like exhaustion, which was manageable, which I knew how to carry. "Thank you," I said, quietly, as if I didn't want to hear myself say it too loudly. "Of course," she said. Just that. Of course. Like it hadn't been unusual. Like she hadn't just spent her afternoon driving me along the East River because she'd read something in my face and decided to respond to it. I went back to the office. I made the calls. I handled what needed handling. I did not think about the afternoon again until midnight, when I was in bed staring at the ceiling and wondering why that particular hour, moving without destination, watched by someone who didn't need me to explain, felt more rested than I had in months. I told myself it was the river, the light, the pause in the schedule. I did not tell myself it was her, but I was starting to have trouble not thinking about her. That was the fact underneath everything else, the one I'd been arranging furniture around without looking at directly. I found myself reviewing the day's events, meetings, decisions, the accumulating machinery of what I'd built, and then, without transition, thinking about something she'd said, a question she'd asked, the specific quality of the silence she offered, which was different from all other silences, because it didn't feel like absence. It felt like presence choosing not to crowd. I started noticing how I felt when I got in the car. Not relieved, exactly. Steadier. Like something in me recognized the space as one where I didn't have to perform competence at quite the same pitch. That recognition scared me. I had built an entire self around performing at full pitch, always. The alternative, the softening, the visible need, the admission that some part of me was tired, felt like the beginning of collapse. Every woman I'd watched crumble in this industry had crumbled because she'd let someone see her soften before it was safe to. I had made myself a rule. No softening. Not at work, not in front of colleagues, not in front of the people who worked for me. Bella worked for me, and somehow she had already seen me soft twice, and I had let her. I sat with that for a long time. I sat with the question of what it meant that I'd allowed it from her specifically. Why her? Why in that car? Why the sound of her voice saying you don't have to go back yet felt like something I hadn't known I needed until I heard it. I didn't have an answer. I told myself I didn't need one. But I started paying attention to the mornings differently. I started noticing that I always looked up when I heard the car approach, that I knew the sound of her footstep outside the building, that I had, at some point without deciding to, learned the exact rhythm of her mornings, the temperature of the coffee she chose based on the season, the way she adjusted the mirror slightly when I was about to have a long day, as if she was making sure she could check on me, the particular pause before she spoke, when she was going to say something I actually needed to hear. I told myself I was paying attention the way you pay attention to anything that runs smoothly in an otherwise complicated life. I was lying. I was paying attention, the way you pay attention to someone. And that was different. That was entirely different. And some part of me, the part I keep furthest from my working hours, the part I'd almost convinced myself didn't exist, already knew exactly what it meant. June. The city in summer has a particular quality of closeness. The heat presses everything together. The buildings, the streets, the people inside the cars. The world stops pretending it has the luxury of distance. We had developed by June a rhythm that I could no longer call professional and leave at that. She knew things about me. Not the things that my board knew, or my legal team, or the women I'd worked alongside for years, and could read me on a spreadsheet but not on a human level. She knew different things. Smaller things. The fact that I couldn't eat before early flights. Not nerves, just biology. Something about altitude and empty stomach. The fact that I needed exactly 12 minutes of silence before a difficult phone call. The fact that when I was working through something complicated, I pressed the fingers of my right hand against the cold window glass in a specific rhythm, and she had stopped asking if I was cold sometime in April because she'd figured out what the gesture actually meant. She knew the sound of a day going wrong before I said anything. She knew when to talk and when to disappear into the silence we'd built together. And she understood, without explanation, that the silence was not absence. It was the most considerate form of presence she could offer. No one had ever offered me that before. That's not self-pity. It's arithmetic. I had structured my life around not needing that from anyone, around being the one who read the room, who anticipated, who served the situation, never the one who was served. I was good at the former. I had no framework for the latter. I didn't know what to do with someone who saw me before I was ready to be seen, and chose to see me gently. I didn't know what to do with her. So I didn't do anything. That was my strategy. Stay inside the known edges of what we were. Be precise about the language I used to name it. And do not let the thing underneath the surface come up for air. She had a different strategy. She didn't have one. She just kept being herself. That was, in retrospect, the problem. There was an afternoon in late June when we were stuck on the bridge in traffic, the kind that stops entirely, that tells you the city has simply decided this will take as long as it takes. I had a call in 20 minutes. I had the window cracked because the air conditioning, and I have never fully agreed. I was reviewing a document on my phone. She said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, Do you like it?" She said. "What you do?" I put my phone down. I looked at the back of her head, the way her shoulders were easy against the seat, the way she asked the question without making it feel like a test. "Yes," I said. "The work itself," she said. "Not the outcome. Not the position, the actual work." I was quiet for a moment. She said, "You don't have to answer." "I do like the work," I said. "I like solving problems. I like the part where something complex becomes clear." I paused. "I don't always like what comes with it." "What comes with it?" she asked. Genuinely curious, not professionally curious, Just curious. The performance, I said. And then I stopped, because that was more honest than I'd intended. She nodded slowly, like she'd suspected something like that and was glad I'd said it. I used to do that too, she said. In PT. Not CEO scale performance, but you become the version of yourself that the position requires, and after a while you forget there are other versions. I looked at her for longer than I should have. What made you stop? I asked. She considered it. The traffic wasn't moving. The bridge held us suspended over the water. Someone got hurt, she said, and I realized I'd been so focused on performing competence that I hadn't actually been present, and presence was the only thing that could have helped. She said it simply, without asking for anything from me, without making it about us or about any layer of conversation we hadn't explicitly opened. But I felt it anyway. I felt it in the specific way you feel something when it arrives too close to your own nerve. When a sentence about someone else's experience lands directly on top of something you've been avoiding in yourself. I had been performing competence for so long that I could not remember the last time I had simply been present. In a meeting, in a conversation, in my own body. I was present in this car. Right now, watching her in the rearview mirror, hearing her talk about something real, feeling the warmth of the summer afternoon through the cracked window. I was more present here than I had been anywhere in recent memory. That realization hit me like something physical. I turned back to the window. I put my phone face down on the seat beside me. I didn't pick it up again until we'd crossed the bridge. After that afternoon, something shifted in me that I did not know how to shift back. I stopped pretending I wasn't looking for her in the morning. I started being honest with myself. Only with myself. Only in the privacy of my own mind. About the fact that the first good moment of most of my days was the moment I got in the car. Not because of what we talked about. Not always. Sometimes because of the coffee waiting. Sometimes because of the silence. Sometimes just because of the way she said good morning. Not brightly. Not with the performed enthusiasm that Renata and half my office deployed every day like armor. Just plainly. Like a statement of fact. It is morning. You are here. I am here. This is good. I held all of this inside myself, and I held it carefully, the way you carry something fragile in both hands and pretend you're just walking. My assistant Renata noticed something had changed. She's the kind of woman who notices everything and makes no comment until she's certain, which is one of the reasons I've trusted her for 9 years. She mentioned it once, sideways. You've been less reactive in meetings lately, which is great. And I thanked her and changed the subject. I didn't explain. What would I have said? I think the most grounding part of my life right now is the person who drives my car. That wasn't a sentence I could say out loud. It wasn't a sentence I could even fully say in my own mind without something in me bracing for impact. But here is what I couldn't unsee. There was a morning in July when she was 20 minutes late. Not her fault. There'd been an accident on the route, and she'd texted Renata, who had relayed the message. I stood outside my building in the early heat, and I felt something I identified, reluctantly and with great precision, as missing her. Not missing the car service, not missing the efficiency, missing her specifically. I stood there with my laptop bag and my coffee and that feeling, and I let it exist for exactly long enough to register it. Then I put it away. The way I put everything away. She pulled up. She looked at me through the windshield before she got out, and her face did the thing it does. A subtle shift, like she was recalibrating to my specific frequency. And she said, "I'm sorry. You didn't have to wait outside." "I like the air," I said. She looked at me with something that was almost a smile, but softer. "You could have said it was fine. You didn't have to cover for me." "I'm not," I started. "I know," she said, and she got back in the car. I followed. I put my bag down. I looked at the back of her head for one long moment before I opened my laptop. "I know," she'd said. What did she know? I spent the entire drive to the office trying not to wonder. By August, I had developed a list of things I was not allowing myself to do, which is, looking back, the clearest possible evidence that some part of me wanted to do them. I was not allowing myself to ask her personal questions beyond the ones that naturally arose from the shape of our days. I was not allowing myself to look at her in the mirror for longer than the conversation required. I was not allowing myself to think about what her days were like when she wasn't driving me. I was not allowing myself to wonder if she talked about me to anyone, if I was a version of a story she told. I was not allowing myself to acknowledge that the thing I'd been drawing on that piece of cream-colored paper, 2 figures in a car, one watching the other, was not nothing. That last one failed first. But before we continue, if you've made it this far, it's because something in this story is landing somewhere real. That feeling of seeing something clearly and choosing not to name it, most of us know exactly what that costs. So go ahead and hit the like button right now. It helps me keep bringing stories like this one to you. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell. YouTube will let you know the moment a new story drops on this channel. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever caught yourself paying attention to someone in a way you weren't ready to explain? Even to yourself? Type it for me. I read every single one. And tell me, what city are you watching from? I'll leave a heart. Now, back to Joan and Bella. September arrived the way seasons do in New York. Suddenly, with cold that appears overnight like a decision the city made without asking. I was in the car on a Friday afternoon when Bella said something that broke the careful architecture I'd been building for 6 months. We were heading uptown. I'd had a long week, the kind that accumulates in the body rather than the calendar. You arrive at Friday with every hour of the 7 days somehow still inside you, pressing against your ribs. She said, "You okay?" Which she'd asked before, which I'd deflected before. But this time she said it differently. She said it the way you say something when you already know the answer and you're giving someone the chance to confirm what you can both see. I was quiet for a moment. I said, "I'm tired." Which sounds like nothing. Which sounds like any answer. But I had never said it to her before. Not directly. I'd allowed her to infer it. I'd let it show in ways I technically didn't authorize. But I had never looked at the question and answered it plainly. She nodded. She didn't say "I know," or "you should rest," or any of the efficient sentences that exist to close that kind of admission quickly. She just drove. And then she said, "I've been thinking about something." I looked up. "I want to tell you, and I want you to know it's not. I'm not asking for anything. I just think if I don't say it, it'll sit there between us and eventually become something it doesn't have to be." My heart was doing something I did not have language for. I said, "Okay." She said, "You're one of the most remarkable people I've ever been around. Not because of what you've built, though that's real, but because of how you hold yourself when things are hard. You don't collapse. You don't deflect. You just keep going." She paused. "And I see that it costs you. I've seen it cost you every single day. And I think someone should say that out loud, even if it's just me, even if it doesn't change anything." The city moved past the windows. I didn't say anything. She said, "That's all. I just wanted you to know that someone sees that." I sat with that sentence for a long time. Someone sees that. I had spent 20 years making sure that what people saw was only the output, the results, the decisions, the version of me that existed in service to the work. I had been meticulous about what I let be visible, not out of dishonesty, out of survival, out of the particular math you do when you're a woman building something serious in a world that is still waiting to use any visible softness against you. She saw through all of it. She'd been seeing through it for months, and she hadn't used it. She hadn't leveraged it. She hadn't even mentioned it until now, and even now she'd said, "I'm not asking for anything." And that was the thing that broke it open. Because I was asking for something. I realized it in that moment with the clarity of something that has been true for a long time finally reaching the surface. I was asking for exactly what she'd just given me. I had been asking for it in the only way I knew how. Silently, indirectly, in the shape of a Tuesday morning I didn't want to end, in the drawing I'd left in the door pocket, in the list of things I wasn't allowing myself. I was asking. And she had answered. I said, "Can you pull over?" She glanced at me in the mirror. No alarm in her eyes, just that particular attention. She pulled over on the first safe block. I sat in the silence for a moment. Then I said, "I don't do this well." "Do what?" she said. "This." I gestured at the space between us. The car. All of it. "I don't have good language for this." She turned in her seat. She was looking at me directly for the first time in 6 months of being in the same car almost every day. Not through the mirror. Just looking at me. "You don't need language," she said. "I need something," I said. "Then take your time," she said. And something in me that had been braced for so long just stopped bracing. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic, collapsing way. It was quiet. It was just the absence of the tension I'd been carrying. And in its place, something I hadn't felt in so long that I'd stopped expecting to feel it. I was afraid. I want to be precise about that. I was genuinely afraid. Not of her. Not of the feeling itself. Of what it would require. Of the things I'd have to stop pretending in order to live honestly inside it. But I was tired of the list of things I wasn't allowing myself. I was tired of the architecture. I was tired of drawing things on cream-colored paper and leaving them in door pockets and pretending I hadn't. She said, "Joan." And the way she said my name, just like that, simply, like it was a word she'd been careful with for a long time. Something landed. I said, "I know what I want to say. I just spent 6 months deciding I wasn't allowed to say it." She waited. I said, "I don't want this to just be the car." She looked at me for a long time. "Neither do I," she said. That was it. That was the whole conversation. The most enormous conversation I'd had in years. And it was 8 sentences in a pulled-over car on a Friday afternoon in September, and somehow it contained everything. Here is what a choice actually costs. Not the choice itself. The moment before and the weeks after, that's where the cost lives. I did not make any decisions that Friday. We didn't make promises or declarations or plans. We sat in the car for another few minutes, both of us quiet in the particular way you're quiet when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, and you need a moment to let the air settle around it. And then she drove me home. And I got out. And she said, "Have a good weekend the way she always had." And I said, "You too, the way I always had." But the drive was different. I was different. On Saturday, I sat in my apartment and I made a list. Not on my phone. On paper. Because paper is honest in a way that screens aren't. When you write something down on paper, you can feel yourself committing to it. You can feel the weight of the pen. On one side, I wrote what I stood to lose. I want to be honest about that list, because minimizing it would be dishonest, and dishonesty is the first thing that destroys anything real. I had a company to run. A company where perceptions mattered, not to me, not to the work itself, but to the world around it. I had a board with members who had been waiting, since the beginning, for reasons. Reasons to doubt. Reasons to reframe my authority as something fragile. I had investors who were watching. I had a professional identity I had built with enormous care over 2 decades, and that identity had been constructed partly by absence, by never giving anyone anything personal to use. That list was real. Those things were real. On the other side, I wrote one line. I have spent 20 years being the version of myself that this position requires. I don't know if I remember how to be any other version. And then, below it, one more. She makes me remember. I sat with those two lists for a long time. I called Renata on Sunday morning. Not about Bella. Not yet. I called because Renata has been with me long enough to know when something is happening that she doesn't have the full picture of, and I've learned that trying to manage her without information costs more than offering it. I said, I need you to know something might change in the coming weeks. Nothing operational. Something personal. I'm not ready to explain it fully, but I wanted to tell you it was coming. There was a pause. She said, Is it good? I said, I think so. Yes, she said. Then I'll handle whatever needs handling. She didn't ask. She didn't push. She just committed to the management of the aftermath of a thing she hadn't been told yet, because 9 years of working together had created a trust that didn't require every detail in advance. I was grateful for her in a way I should probably say out loud more often. On Monday morning, I called the car service to adjust the arrangement. I was honest with the dispatcher about why. Not fully honest, but honest enough. I was moving the contract internally, and I wanted Bella specifically retained and paid at a different rate. And I was no longer using the service in its current format. It was a professional conversation. It was clean. That Monday was the first morning in months that I stood outside my building and felt something other than the specific anticipation that had been accumulating since winter. I felt afraid, but I also felt, I am still looking for the right word for this, aligned, like I was moving in the same direction as something inside me that had been asking to be listened to for a very long time. She pulled up at 6:47. She got out. She looked at me over the roof of the car. She said, You look different. I said, I made some changes. She waited. I ended the contract, I said. With the service. She was still. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know, I said. That's why I did it. She understood. I watched her understand. It moved across her face in a specific order. Surprise, then something careful, then something that wasn't careful at all, that was just real. The cost came in waves. It didn't arrive all at once. Nothing real does. There was a board meeting in October where something had changed in the room and I couldn't locate it precisely, but I felt it. A specific formality from two members who had always been formal, but somehow more so now. A question about my focus. A question framed professionally, deniably, about whether I was adequately managing distractions in what they called a pivotal quarter. I answered it precisely and moved on. But I sat with it afterward. I sat with the fact that someone in that room had information about my life that I hadn't offered, and had decided to bring it into professional space as a test. I did not break. That's not strength. It's just practice. I've been tested in that room before. There was an investor dinner where a woman I'd known for years made a comment at the table, not to me, sideways, to the person beside her, that I heard, and that was designed to be heard. I looked at her. She didn't look away. I didn't say anything. I moved on. There was a colleague, someone I'd considered close, or close enough for this industry, who stopped returning my calls with the same warmth, who became suddenly efficient where she'd been warm before. I noticed. I didn't confront it. Some distances are decisions that belong to the person creating them. Here is what I kept coming back to. None of those things erased what I'd felt on the bridge last summer. None of them changed what I'd found in the door pocket on a Tuesday morning. None of them made the fear of being seen feel bigger than the exhaustion of staying hidden. I had built something real, something I was proud of. And that thing was still there. Every morning in my office, every presentation, every problem solved, every person on my team who was good at what they did, because I had chosen carefully and built carefully. They hadn't taken that. They'd made it more expensive. They'd made me carry it in a way that cost more, but they hadn't taken it. And on the other side of every one of those costs was something I hadn't known how to want until I let myself want it. There was an evening in November. Cold. The city had arrived at the version of itself that forgets summer was ever real. We were in my apartment, which for 7 years had been designed for one and was still learning how to hold 2 people. She was on the couch with her coat still halfway on, the kind of comfortable that happens when you've stopped calculating whether you're imposing. I had made coffee. Real coffee, finally, not from a cup holder. I handed her a cup. She looked up at me. "You okay?" she asked. Same question. Different from all the other times. I said, "Yes." And I meant it. Not the performance of it. Not the management of it. Not the version of yes that means I will be, or I'm working on it, or I have no useful alternative. Just yes. Plain and solid and true. She wrapped her hands around the cup. She looked at me for a moment in that way she has, that way that sees without crowding. She said, "I know it cost you things." "This." I said, "Some things." She said, "I'm sorry about the ones that hurt." And I said, "Because it was true. Because it was the truest thing I had. I'm not. Not because the hurt hadn't been real. Because hurt is not the same as wrong. Because 20 years of being cautious had taught me that the things worth protecting will always have a cost. And the things that don't cost anything are usually not what they claim to be." I sat down beside her. She was warm beside me the way only specific people are warm. Not just temperature, but presence. The particular weight of someone who is fully there with you rather than partly somewhere else. I had been partly somewhere else for as long as I could remember. I was here. I still have that drawing. The cream-colored paper with the 2 figures in the car, one behind the wheel, one in the back seat looking forward. No faces, just lines. Just the shape of 2 people who didn't know yet what they were to each other. I keep it in my desk at home. Not hidden. Just there. Some mornings I look at it, and I think about the version of me who left it in a door pocket and didn't understand why her hands had put it there. Who had made a list of all the things she wasn't allowing herself. Who had spent 6 months trying to keep the surface of her life as smooth as possible. That version of me did the best she could with what she understood. She just hadn't understood yet that safety and aliveness are not the same thing. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do, the genuinely, specifically, quietly bravest thing, is to stop building architecture around what you feel and just let it be there. Let it be seen. Let it cost what it costs. The morning I finally decided to stop managing what I felt, I walked out of my building, and the city was doing what it does. Loud and fast and completely unbothered by any single life inside it. And that was fine. That was exactly right. Because I wasn't asking the city for anything. I was just walking toward the car. I was just walking toward her. And for the first time in longer than I can precisely measure, I wasn't pretending I wasn't. If this story found something in you, write "chosen" in the comments. That's how I'll know you stayed with me until the end. And if you want another story that gets into your chest and stays there, click on the video showing up on your screen right now. A big kiss, and until next time. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description.